Okay, so this is this week's reaction video, which I find this to be probably the most interesting topic that has been covered for a video, which is how to change your behavior, which, at least I think, a lot of people struggle with. And the lady brings up some really interesting points on what works, what doesn't work, and how we should change our approach, and how every person is impacted differently in a different way by the way you approach them. So the first thing she starts off with is something that you should be aware of when you want to change your behavior, but you're trying, but it's failing. You should be aware of warnings. So the example that's used in the video, and I'll use as well, is people with cigarettes or cigars or alcohol or any sort of that. Obviously, everybody knows that they shouldn't be doing it, but they do it anyways because their mind is telling them, and their brain distorts it into something that they want it to be. So, like, a warning that could come from cigars is you could die, you could get cancer, you can seriously hurt your health. But the reality is, from the research that was conducted, was that for the most part, about 90-95% of people, warnings don't really have an impact on most people. It's just there. It's just something that people use to degrade other people or potentially make them feel better. And it doesn't really do anything. It just serves little to no purpose. It's just there. And so what we gather from that is, for the most part, that usually only negative comes out of it. When someone's trying to tell us those things, those kind of warnings, like that you could die, our first thoughts are, oh my gosh, you're just trying to degrade me, you're just trying to judge the way that I live. Which, I mean, yes, to an extent that's rational, but at the same time that's irrational because they're using facts. So what we do is, well, one, we obviously don't take in their input, and what we do instead is we do, unironically enough, what animals do, which is our most common responses. We either freeze or we fight from the situation. So, and this is not to be confused with fight or flight, and a lot of times we don't really fight. We don't really, I mean, in a way we're fighting the issue, but we don't like head on tackle it. We mostly try to avoid, but again, it depends on the person. With freezing, we just freeze. We just, as I said before, we distort. We train ourselves, our brain. So we always try and look for ways to make the situation better, even when it's at its worst possible point. Like, you could be in the hospital, but someone could still think of a way to, like, want to just escape it all. Because for the most part, people are thinking about in the present and not the future or not the past. They're just thinking about themselves in the present. Or a lot of times, they will fight, or they will just poof, they will disappear from the situation. They just will do anything they can to avoid it, as long as it's reasonable bad news to avoid, like bad news that can be avoided, like some things you can't avoid in life. But if it's something that can be avoided, most people will choose to avoid it. And like taxes, like people will avoid that, but obviously that's mandatory, so you can't just run from it all the time, for example. And lots of times whenever people do take the time to finally care, like, a lot of times it's too late. Like, I'll go back to the example of like an alcoholic. By the time they care, they could be so far deep into their addiction that they could already be gone. They could have already messed up their entire life forever. by the time they want to make a change. And once again, it just doesn't work because our brain is a lot more powerful than what we think. So, to change our behavior, there are 3 overall ideas and principles that a lot of people are attracted to according to studies, and we should use these as positive input and positive ways to help each other. So the first one of these that the video talks about is social incentives, which I think this makes a lot of sense. Like, obviously, the reason most people don't want to hang out with you is because you probably do have a bad habit, or you're weird, you're disturbing, you don't fit in. You're what people would call an outclass. So people want to change when they're told, like, hey, you can make some friends, you can be friends with us, you can, I don't know, get a job, you can turn your life around if you just even take one step in the right direction. You can have a social life, which some people really do desire. I don't know about me, but it does depend on the people, on the person. So another one is, which I find this kind of contradicting, but immediate rewards, which, I don't know, a lot of things don't come immediately, but the things that do come immediately, the studies showed that the example they used was at a hospital, and they found that a lot of workers beforehand weren't washing their hands to prevent disease, but what they did was they implemented a system to where when they did wash their hands, it would track who was doing it, how many times, for the week, for the day, and people really like seeing their progress, and they like to be, like, they feel like they're being recognized, which this does solve the issue of some people feeling like they're going unnoticed, which I like that. I like that idea. I think people should be noticed for their ideas, because a lot of times when people do the right thing, it just goes unnoticed, and we only focus on the negatives, and we just block it out. The third and final idea or principle that the video talks about is progress monitoring, which is just like the last one. We like to see progress. We like to at least know that we're getting somewhere. We don't want to feel like we're just stuck. The example that the TED Talk uses is that instead of telling the kid that's smoking that, hey, you could possibly develop cancer, you could possibly mess up your health, instead what you should do is you should focus on the positive and say, hey, you could play sports, you could be able to go back to school, you could live normally, and help them focus that way instead of degrading their motivation. So overall, I think this video is really interesting. I reacted pretty positively to it. I think I could take a lot of advice from it. Overall, pretty interesting video. Some people really do need to change their behavior, including me and probably a lot of other people. And I can definitely use a lot of advice taken from it.